Thank you all for joining us this evening. My name is Zoe. I'm a member of the Black Alliance for Peace Baltimore Citywide Alliance. BAP is a people-centered human rights project which seeks to recapture and redevelop the historic anti-war, anti-imperialist, and pro-peace positions of the radical Black movement. Through educational activities, community organizing, and movement support, organizations and individuals in the Alliance work together to oppose both militarized domestic state repression, the policies of destabilization, subversion, and the permanent war agenda of the U.S. state globally. We are joined by Diaspora Collective, a member organization of the BAP Solidarity Network. Through community organizing and public education and international campaigns, DPC is organizing Puerto Ricans and allies across the diaspora toward the achievement of a free and independent Puerto Rico and the liberation of all peoples and nations from imperialism, colonialism, capitalism, and patriarchy. Dominoes Sugar is marketed in Baltimore as a prized possession and symbol of American industry. Yet, people within the city are unfamiliar with the history behind its rise to popularity. So tonight's teaching, Dulce Imperialismo, I named it, how the U.S. underdeveloped Puerto Rico and Baltimore City via Dominoes Sugar Company is an examination of how the United States imperialism leaves its bitter aftertaste around the world. The interconnected struggles between the city and the island will be spoken into in detail as a common enemy that must be defeated. The struggle for self-determination and revolutionary transformation of society requires us to organize together so that we build the power necessary to shape our destinies and achieve true independence. So please allow myself, my comrade Milan, and our comrade Elio to feed your curiosity on Dominoes Sugar Company and its connection to Baltimore here and there. So first off, and you guys, I'll give the mic to whoever. What do you know about Dominoes Sugar Company already? What do you know about it?
It can be anything.
There's no wrong answer. Bring your ignorance here.
I know that I buy Dominoes Sugar.
Yeah, that's true. I know I have it in my house right now.
When I was like 7 years old, I would go sit in the restaurants and I'd really take advantage of the free sugar packets that were offered to me, and I'd have like 5 of them as an appetizer.
Anyone else?
I know they got that big sign you can see when you go into the harbor.
Yeah. That's interesting, and you know, like there is psychology behind like advertisement and making like signs and logos such as Dominoes Sugar Company. You know, just the appearance, it looks opulent, it looks like something of the time that it was made.
It's been around for a long time. It goes back to my childhood days. You can see all that gray hair.
Yeah.
That goes back to the middle of last century at least when I was a child.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. Is there anyone else who would like to share before we continue? Okay. So here's a fun fact about Dominoes Sugar. The Jones Act of 1917 solidified U.S. political and economic control of Puerto Rico by making the island of U.S. territory, which granted Puerto Rican citizenship without voting rights. The Jones Act of 1920 ensured U.S. companies like the Dominoes Sugar Company, formerly part of the American Sugar Refining Company, were able to extract sugarcane from Puerto Rico, where the island was a major producer of sugar in the early to mid-20th century. The 1920 Jones Act also restricts Puerto Rico's ability to trade with countries as an independent nation. Therefore, Puerto Rico's local economy and food security became depleted by US-based companies who retained the profit made from sugarcane cultivated on the island around the 1960s. Global competition made Puerto Rican sugar less profitable as the US began importing sugar from cheaper sources of low-wage labor like the Dominican Republic. Today, 85% of Puerto Rico's food is imported despite their fertile soil. The Jones Act is a unilateral coercive measure to defund and destabilize Puerto Rico to a vulnerable state. The policies thereafter are an assault on Puerto Rico's food and economic sovereignty. Now I'm going to pass it off to my comrade Milan, who is also a member of the Haiti Americans team with BAP Black Alliance for Peace.
Thanks, everybody. Before I get started, just want to make sure that everybody signs in at that table. If you are listening, also pick up one of these Jones Act flyers up there. You're sitting back there, and that includes BAP members. So if you are a member of BAP, still sign in. But yeah, so I'm going to get started just talking about the objectives. So first, we're going to define and explain economic warfare, what that means in the context of Baltimore City. We're also going to show how the Dominoes Sugar Company underdevelops Baltimore as a tool of that economic warfare. We're going to highlight the connections between colonialism in Puerto Rico and Baltimore. And then finally, we're going to encourage the participation in and awareness of two really important campaigns that we have at BAP: No Compromise, No Retreat, and the Zone of Peace campaign. All of that literature can be found at that table as well, so please pick that up. We'll go into detail about what they are, but they are over there for y'all to look at. So to make sure all of us are kind of on the same page, we have some definitions for you. So first is imperialism, and that is the most evolved form of capitalism in which Western powers exploit and oppress those in the global South through indirect and direct means to amass wealth. Indirect means are things like trade agreements, and direct means are things like direct military occupation. Colonialism, that is a system of direct domination of an indigenous majority by an occupying minority in which resources, land, and labor are all under the direct control of that minority. Internal colonialism, that is really important for what we're going to be talking about today, specifically with Baltimore, and that is a system of political, economic, and social domination inside of the U.S., in which Black/African communities are forcibly segregated and intentionally destabilized. And that is in order to provide the ruling class with power and control. And this system of exploitation and control is maintained by the police, and they are our deadly occupying force. Just how direct imperialism, the deadly military force, or deadly occupying force is the military. Us here, it is the police. And you can see that because just last week, another Black man was murdered by the police, Bilal Abdullah. So this is something that is ongoing. It happened 10 years ago, it happened 20 years ago, it is consistent. And then finally, something that is also important is neo-colonialism. And that is the most advanced form of imperialism in which a petty bourgeois managerial class emerges from the colonized masses in partnership with and alliance to the imperialist state. In BAP, we call this the Black misleadership class. That is the class of Black people who are in these positions of power, who have allegiance to the state and do not have allegiance to the people that they are supposed to be serving. So I want to talk about economic warfare in Baltimore, and so that is economic warfare as waged against African/Black people and oppressed communities under internal colonialism and global imperialism that operates through systemic deprivation and exploitation. So this warfare manifests in premature death, health disparities, gentrification, unemployment, things that we see all the time here in Baltimore, and the privatization of public goods that are necessary for our well-being. So financialization, corporate profiteering, different crises, attacks on labor, and coercive debt regimes, they entrench the masses into this mass poverty. They ensure economic destabilization for the global majority. And these conditions are strategic. They uphold this imperialist hierarchy. It is not individualized, it is strategic, it is intentional, and it renders African and Black life expendable while transforming marginalized nations and communities into endless sites of accumulation. So as an internal colony, Baltimore is one that is intentionally deprived of necessary resources and funding that would support and maintain the well-being of its residents. So while white neighborhoods benefit from development projects and investment into their communities, Africans here suffer from the brutal impacts of disinvested communities, increased lead poisoning, dilapidated schools, lack of access to healthy foods, and vicious violence from military and police forces. So we'll go into some detail about what that looks like, but essentially, corporations and developers make millions of dollars off of our labor, off of our resources, while the people here are suffering in Baltimore. And to start, we're going to start off with redlining. Redlining actually started here in Baltimore in 1910. A black man tried to buy a house in a white neighborhood, and the mayor very quickly clearly some ordinance segregating black people to certain areas and white people to certain areas. So this was both a tool of both racial and economic domination. It was a way to keep Africans in poor conditions. And the mayor was actually quoted as saying blacks should be quarantined in isolated slums. So this was something that was intentional, it was again systemic, and it was both racialized and an issue of class and economic domination. To this day, we still see the effects of that. Most commonly now, it's called black butterflies, the white L's, the big project that's come recently in the past couple of years. And that black butterfly, white L, as you can see up there, the areas that are disinvested, the areas that are suffering, the areas that do have the most poverty, that do have the things that I'm going to go in more detail about in this presentation, they're black areas and they make the shape of a butterfly. And the areas that do have that investment, that do have that funding, that do have those better health outcomes, they make the shape of a white L. And it's actually interesting because some of those redline communities that happened in 1910 and then later in 1930 when that map was officially made in Baltimore, they're still the ones suffering. So I'll go into detail in the next slide, but there is a direct correlation between communities in 1930 who were redlined and communities now who are still disinvested, who are still dealing with like such horrible conditions. But we're gonna go next into the poor health conditions. So Baltimore's rate of emergency department visits due to asthma is the highest in Maryland. Baltimore also has the highest percentage of children with elevated blood levels in Maryland. That is largely due to conditions that are created. That's due to pollution. That's due to poorly constructed houses. That's due to things that can be controlled. I know my family, I have asthma, my dad has asthma, my grandma has asthma, and that is because of the areas that we live in. And also, 1 in 4 people in Baltimore live in food deserts. So 1 in 4 people, if we all were to say that we all lived in Baltimore, I don't know if y'all do or not, but 1 in every 4 of us does not have access to healthy food, does not have access to grocery stores, does not have access to anything that is nearby where they can actually get food. It's not mentioned here, but Baltimore also has one of the highest rates of heroin use and overdose in the country. The rate of HIV is twice as high as the national average, and that's largely due to drug usage and like the intravenous needle drug. That's what I'm trying to say. I'm not saying that phrase right, but using needles for drugs. And I know the opioid epidemic, quote unquote, has come to the media, but there's always been an opioid epidemic in Baltimore, and for generations. Like I've seen it in my life, my mother has suffered in her life. So this is also something that is, I keep saying, systemic, it is created, it is intentional, and the fact that 30 years later, we are still seeing the fact that heroin use and overdose is one of the highest in the country is such an issue. And so, to go to the economic domination part, Baltimore has a poverty rate of 20.1%. That is almost double the national average of 12.4%, and almost triple the Maryland average of 9.4%. And the average white household in Baltimore makes twice the income of the average black household.
Any questions? No? Oh, no.
So, we also have mass imprisonment. So, Baltimore City makes up 9% of Maryland residents, but 40% of the Maryland prison population. So, less than 10% of the population in the state, but almost half the people who are incarcerated in state prisons. Of that percentage, over a third of the people who are from Baltimore come from just 10 cities, just 10 neighborhoods. Baltimore has a total of 55 neighborhoods, and so of those 55, a third of people who are from Baltimore state prison come from just 10 neighborhoods. One of those is Sandtown. Sandtown was one of the first red line neighborhoods. So again, that was over 100 years ago, and we are still seeing the ramifications of that. We also have mass divestment. So neighborhoods that are less than 50% African American receive nearly 4 times the investment of neighborhoods that are over 85% African American. That's a lot of numbers, so if you're like me and numbers kind of confuse you, neighborhoods that are mostly non-black, mostly white, they receive nearly 4 times the investment as neighborhoods that are mostly black. And the final piece we're going to go into for characteristics of an internal colony is educational inequality. So black students are more often and more harshly disciplined, and lack of infrastructure has caused students in Baltimore to miss out on more than 1 million hours of instruction, and that was in a 5-year study. So that is obviously much more than that, right? Like this has been an issue for generations. Lack of infrastructure includes things like no heat, no air conditioning, leaky ceilings. If school was still in session, a lot of schools would not have had school right now because of how hot it is. And as we'll see like later, it makes no sense that there are billions of dollars being made in Baltimore and we still have conditions like students can't go to school because it's hot, or they can't go to school because it's cold outside. So we're gonna continue, and we're gonna talk about industrialization in Baltimore. So now everybody has kind of like a framework of what an internal colony is, where we're coming from, and like the way we're analyzing these things. We're gonna talk about the port specifically. So Baltimore's port has been really important. It says 19th century, but not just the 19th century, in the 18th century as well, it was a really important port because of its location. But in the 19th century, it was really important to the slave trade, specifically going into the New Orleans slave trade. The economy was also a really big hub for agricultural trade, and that economy the economy in Baltimore was built on the backs of African labor, both free and enslaved, especially in the ports. The people that were caulkers, like Frederick Douglass, the people that were on the boats, the people that were working in those areas were Africans, and that was both free and enslaved labor. So fast forward, by 1900, there are 13 companies that control large areas of Baltimore manufacturing, and 21 national banks and 9 local banks controlling Baltimore's financial interests. This is in 1900, and we still see a framework in Baltimore of U.S. banks and corporations owning the land, owning the resources, and owning the labor in Baltimore. And that's manifested today in the land being owned by corporations, by developers, and by universities now. So we're still in 1900. We're going to go a couple years into 1904. It's a horrible fire. There are a bunch of blocks that get burned down, and national corporations begin to build industrial parks around the ports of Baltimore, again, because it's such a strategic location. One of those is Bethlehem Steel. That one is really well known in Baltimore. Bethlehem Steel really had a monopoly on the labor market. So many people worked at Bethlehem Steel, but Bethlehem Steel was polluting the economy, polluting the environment, it was polluting the water, it was polluting the air. There was so much racism in those unions. Africans were forced to migrate from the South because of violence, and they often got jobs at places like Bethlehem Steel, and they were still facing similar violence. They were still facing violence. They were still facing these conditions in the courts. But that's kind of like the framework of this industrialization that's happening in Baltimore around that time. So in 1922, that is when Dominoes Sugar Company comes to Baltimore City. And so 21 acres of land are used, the labor of Baltimore residents is used, and Dominoes Sugar Company becomes the #1 sugar producer in the United States. So you can imagine they still are the #1 sugar producer in the US, but they are making so much money, they're making billions of dollars. And to this day, the Port of Baltimore generates billions of dollars of revenue, and as I just explained, the actual people who are living in Baltimore are not getting that revenue, right? Like I said, there are kids who can't go to school because it's hot outside. So now we're going to talk a little bit more about Dominoes Sugar Company as a tool of industrialization. So Baltimore, like I said, location of the port city is really important because it has interstate access, it has railway access, and it was really an ideal location for importing sugar from the Caribbean. I know today we're talking about Puerto Rico, but I want to keep in mind that this is not just an issue that's affecting Puerto Rico, this is affecting the Americas, this is affecting, specifically with sugar, the Dominican Republic. There are these communities called Attendees in the Dominican Republic where Haitian migrants, Dominicans of Haitian descent and Dominicans are forced to work on sugar plantations, and they're getting pennies, right? And these people are getting billions of dollars for that labor and for these horrible conditions that are happening. So In the context of Baltimore, though, while it appears that Baltimore is benefiting from this industrialization, they're getting so much money going through these ports, it's actually not going to Baltimore, it's going through Baltimore. So Baltimoreans do not reap any of the benefits from having the largest U.S. sugar producer in their backyard. Similar to corporations in Puerto Rico, as my comrade will talk about, Domino receives indirect subsidies in the forms of price guarantees and limits on imported sugar, and they spend millions of dollars on Senate lobbying for that. And so that raises sugar prices. It adds a hidden tax of billions of dollars on the public and higher food costs. So again, people are suffering more, they're paying more, while there are tax breaks and subsidies on those people that are already making billions of dollars. To kind of contextualize that, the Bamboo family, they are the current owners of Domino. They make billions of dollars. They don't have their exact net worth out there because Domino is also a privately owned company. But they're making billions of dollars while, like I said earlier, 1 in 5 Baltimoreans live under the national poverty line, and more than 1 in 4 live in food deserts. The last thing I'm going to talk about before we pass it along to Comrade Elio is the impact of the Dominoes Sugar Company on Baltimore. And so this plant, similar to many other factories that have popped up on the ports, has contributed to devastating air and wastewater pollution levels in South Baltimore, especially in relation to the Diaspora River. They have faced little repercussions, so some examples of that are in 2012, they paid $200,000 for sending pollutants into the air, and in 1997, they were fined $59,000 for dumping raw sugar and discharging processed wastewater into the Petitio River. They of course denied that, but they paid it. $200,000, $50,000 may seem like a lot of money, but if they are making just $1 billion, that's less than 1%. That's 0.02%, right? There have also been explosions, there have been injuries in the Baltimore plant with fines as low as $4,000. And so if $200,000 is 0.02% of that revenue, $4,000 is like nothing. And the exploitation of labor and extraction of resources has been maintained through the police force, and we'll talk more about that militarization later on in this presentation. But I also want to reference really quickly that South Baltimore is one of the most polluted areas in Baltimore, and a big part of that is because of all the factories that are there, because of all the ports that set up shop there. Most recently, there are people saying that their children sweat off black water. So these companies, they are looked at as like a pride of Baltimore, right? But they're doing so much devastating damage to our children, to us, to our land, to our water sources. And again, that whole system is maintained through the police force. All right, so I am going to now pass it to our comrade Elio, who's going to talk about Dominoes Sugar Company as a tool of colonialism in Puerto Rico and kind of take us out from our localized understanding of this. Sorry.
Hey everybody, my name is Elio. I'm the DMV chapter co-lead of Diaspora Collective. So taking over Dominoes Sugar Company, a tool of colonialism in Puerto Rico. The invasion of Puerto Rico by the United States occurred in 1898 after the signing of the Treaty of Paris, which transferred the Philippines, Puerto Rico, Cuba, and Guam into the control of the United States. Initially governed by military generals until Charles Herbert Allen became the first civilian governor in 1900. He immediately raised taxes and withheld loans to small farmers, essentially causing small farmers to give up their land to private corporations that would create the monopoly that is sugarcane under the American Sugar Refining Company, later Dominoes Sugar. Allen would resign a year later and went to work on Wall Street. Sorry about that. By 1907, Allen's syndicate, the American Sugar Refining Company, owned or controlled 98% of the sugar processing capacity in the United States and was known as the Sugar Trust. By 1910, Allen was treasurer of the American Sugar Refining Company. By 1913, he was its president, and by 1915, he sat on its board of directors. By 1930, Allen and the U.S. banking interests had converted 45% of all arable land in Puerto Rico into sugar plantations. These bank syndicates also owned the Insular Postal System, the entire coastal railroad, and the international seaport of Senegal. By 1934, 80% of all of the sugarcane farms in Puerto Rico were owned by a U.S. banking syndicate. So moving into the sugarcane strike and the following repression from that strike, Pedro Albizu Campos, a leading figure in the Puerto Rican nationalist movement, began to organize sugarcane workers that would eventually go on an island-wide strike in 1933. 85 strikes occurred across sectors, including tobacco, needle, and transportation workers. The strike raised their wages from 45 cents to $1.75 per 12-hour day. Following the strike, the United States began to surveil, repress, and attack the Nationalist Party. The Rio Piedras massacre occurred on October 24th, 1935, at the University of Puerto Rico. Nationalist students protested against Chancellor Carlos Cardón, who supported the U.S.-backed reforms. Police, under orders from the colonial government, opened fire on unarmed nationalist students. 4 students were killed, including Eduardo Rodriguez Vega and Ramon Espagam. In 1936, Pedro Albizu Campos was arrested and imprisoned for advocating the overthrow of the U.S. government. The Dulce massacre occurred on March 21st, 1937, during a peaceful Nationalist Party protest in Dulce. Protesters gathered to demand the release of Pedro Albizu Campos and to commemorate the abolition of slavery. The U.S. appointed governor revoked the protest permit and ordered police action. Insular police opened fire on unarmed civilians, killing 19 people and injuring over 200. The nationalist uprisings of 1950 were met with martial law, mass arrests, and bombings in towns like Ayuya and Pueblo. The nationalist attacks on the U.S. Capitol in 1954 led to further crackdowns and life sentences for those involved. The government used legal tools like the gag law or Law 53 to ban pro-independence symbols, speech, and the Puerto Rican flag. And up next is
1951 is...
Sorry.
1951 is a bonanza year for Puerto Rico sugar. A helicopter makes an inspection trip over one of the great centrales, where 150 workers cut acres of cane and...
We're not talking about the excuse us.
I think so low the volume.
Okay. It's a quick video just talking about showing the conditions of the sugarcane workers at this time.
We might get blasted.
1951 is a bonanza year for Puerto Rico sugar. A helicopter makes an inspection trip over one of the great centrales, where 150 workers cut acres of cane, and the copter tosses the stalks into the air with the backwash of its rotors. An army of 137,000 experts harvest the cane with razor-sharp machetes. One stroke is all they ever need. A miss amounts to a minor crime. A good portion of the $150 million crop goes toward their wages. Caribbean sun and ample rain pour forth their sweet bounty. It takes 10.5 million tons of cane to produce this year's record crop of 1,300,000 tons of sugar, which the refineries pour out, most of it for the American market. Not only does the cane yield sugar, but it is a potential source of 25 million gallons of alcohol in case of war, a bulwark in the nation's economy.
And then moving into Operation Bootstrap. After the collapse of the sugarcane industry, Operation Bootstrap was launched in Puerto Rico in 1947 to transform the economy from agriculture to manufacturing. The government attracted U.S. and foreign companies by offering tax exemptions, factory space, and duty-free access to the United States market, shifting the economy from rural agriculture controlled by a few landowners to urban industrial wage labor. The program spurred industrial growth in textiles, petrochemicals, and electronics, causing mass urban migration. However, many jobs were low wage with few protections, making the economy dependent on U.S. corporations. Factories were concentrated in urban zones, but job creation lagged behind labor displacement, led to the reliance on imports for food. Today, Puerto Rico imports about 85% of the food people eat. Puerto Rico appeared to benefit from the industrial development, but Puerto Ricans did not reap the benefit. Currently, about 45% of Puerto Ricans live below the United States poverty level. And just want to highlight Diaspora Collective. We did recently release our 13-point program. I just want to highlight the first point, which calls for independence and self-determination for Puerto Rico. The first point is the immediate end of Puerto Rico's status as a colony of the United States. Recognition of Puerto Rico as a sovereign nation with complete political and economic autonomy, and an end to the exploitation of Puerto Rico's economy by foreign corporations and investors. And our strategy calls for the creation of a powerful cultural front to galvanize and inspire the independence movement across the Puerto Rican diaspora, the establishment of a vanguard organization within the diaspora to spearhead and synchronize revolutionary programs and initiatives, the cultivation of spiritual practices to connect us to our land, culture, and revolutionary heritage, the forging of robust alliances with other nations and diasporas combating imperialism, strategic coordination with organizations, campaigns, and movements rooted in the archipelago, and our active engagement in international anti-imperialist movements that align with our objectives for Puerto Rican independence and socialism. And I'm going to pass it back to Comrade.
Thank you. Tanto aquí como allá. So both here and there, Dominoes Sugar Company is a tool for underdevelopment. In Puerto Rico, the U.S. accumulated capital through sugar plantations that was shipped to refineries in the U.S. And in Baltimore, the U.S. continued to accumulate capital by processing this raw sugar in these refineries and then exporting it internally and globally. So in both Puerto Rico and Baltimore, land, labor, and resources, means of production in this case, are extracted from these communities. Neither Puerto Ricans or Baltimoreans have control over the means of production. The U.S. government and U.S. corporations extract all of these things to gain wealth, while the people in these lands suffer through poverty, food apartheid, and economic instability. Both areas are extremely militarized, and that militarization preserves the exploitive relationship between the colonizer and the colonized. Just to go further into how militarization plays into industrialization, here's an example. In Puerto Rico, there are currently 30 fully operational NORTHCOM and SOUTHCOM military bases occupying the island. Consistent military training exercises are conducted here using tactics from Israeli forces. The U.S. can ensure political, economic, and social military control over Puerto Rico by its occupation of at least 20,000 acres of land still to this day. The U.S. has identified that Puerto Rico as a highly strategic location for the U.S. U.S. intervention and occupation. Just doubling back to why the Jones Act of 1917, when it comes into play in this instance. And in Baltimore, there are 20 military facilities in Maryland. 5 are in Baltimore. Baltimore is one of the most heavily policed cities in the country. Through the Deadly Exchange Program, Baltimore officers are also trained by Israeli forces. So what do we do? No compromise, no retreat. demilitarize the U.S. by eliminating the programs that facilitate arming and colonial training of police forces and law enforcement, and provide cover for abuses and killings of African, Black, nationally oppressed, and working class neighborhoods. So our focuses are: one, to abolish the Department of Defense 1033 program, a program in which Baltimore is included in, and to B, stop the Israeli training of police forces. We have nothing useful to learn from the diaper flukes. We also want to dismantle the militarized infrastructure of U.S.-led imperialism and the axis of domination domestically and globally, with the focus on stopping cop cities and reprioritizing funds towards people-centered human rights. Assert sovereignty, dignity, and right to self-determination of our African Black peoples and all peoples and nations globally by ending violation of people-centered human rights, which means also end economic warfare on our people and our neighborhoods, and to shut down immigration customs enforcement and end the root cause of migration. So on your seats, there's a case study that I'm going to read to you guys, and this is the Jones Act in present day. And some recent news about. So the economic impact of the Jones Act for the United States has become a hindrance to domestic economic security. Despite its intended purpose to maintain the economic dominance by extraction of resources in the global south, the Jones Act restricts coast-wide trade by requiring vessels, transportation goods between U.S. ports to be U.S. built, U.S. owned, and U.S. crewed. This effectively prohibits foreign flag ships from participating in this trade using militarization via the U.S. Coast Guard, as well as increasing shipping costs, particularly for U.S. territories like Puerto Rico and Hawaii. These restrictions and militarized enforcement dissuade businesses, freight companies, foreign goods, and services from engaging with U.S. global trade. In turn, makes everything from groceries to gas more expensive for Americans like us. To build a U.S. ship in cooperation with the Jones Act cost $333 million, when the same one cost $55 million made in China. While countries in the global south maintain their economic security on cooperative and nonpartisan partnerships, the current U.S. administration has realized that these imperialist measures are financially hurting them. On June 14, 2025, Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House of Representatives, introduced House Bill 3940, Open America's Waters Act, and specifically Section 2 of Repeal of Certain Limitations is an effort to reverse these limiting measures. So that's also like the contradiction of like the libertarian regime. They can recognize that this is hurting them, but still want to maintain power. So please be careful if you guys decide to review this act with the language. 2025 also marks 10 years of the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals for 2030. 2025, 2030. Number 17 acknowledges the unilateral measures of Western countries imposed on the global south, as 17.10 states promote a universal rules-based, open, non-discriminatory, and equitable multilateral trading system under the World Trade Organization, including through the conclusion of negotiations under its Doha development agenda. However, Puerto Rico, as a U.S. territory, cannot trade as its own entity. Puerto Rico needs permission from Congress or the State Department to engage in trade deals with neighboring South and Central American countries. So, a way to combat this is just spreading the word. The Zone of Peace campaign is something that is similar to that. It's a campaign to make America a zone of peace, free from war, colonialism, capitalism, and all forms of imperialism, including this specific measure. It's a call to expel all occupying forces from our region. The U.S. NATO Out of America's network is a call to action for individuals, organizations, and movements to join the fight against militarism, colonialism, capitalism, and imperialism, so that our Americas can be a zone of sovereignty, self-determination, and liberation. What do you think?
Go back.
Oh, wait, go back.
with that, QR code is to join the network. So you can join as an individual, you can join as an organization, but we are really trying to push this campaign because, as you can see, this is something that is affecting not just people across the Americas, but it's affecting us, and we need to be in solidarity and struggling with our comrades all over the Americas.
Can y'all make some noise for everybody? So our co-coordinator and comrade Sheena is going to go around and Petros is going around. Our other co-coordinator and dear comrade Petros is going around to get reflections from you all. And please feel free. Like, we're here to feed your curiosity. There's no such thing as a dumb question. If there's anything new that you've learned today that you would like to ask more or expand on, feel free to.
And please keep your arms raised. I'll come to you.
I'm Emil. I was fantastic talk, by the way. I was just wondering if you had any recommendations for like further reading about the history of Puerto Rico, and as it stands as a current colony of the American Empire. I'm very interested, and I would like to know if you could have ran into any particular sources you felt were compelling and insightful. And thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I think one of the best books to start off with is called War Against All Puerto Ricans. It gives a very good history of the repression in Puerto Rico, a lot of the activities that the United States government did. Yeah, it just gives a very good overall introduction and synopsis. I can get you the name of the author after. I'm just blanking on that. But War Against All Puerto Ricans is a great way to start.
I also want to shout out Diaspora. They have a lot of articles and essays you can read, especially there's one on Southcom. That's not something that a lot of people in the U.S. know about. The U.S. has a bunch of different military command centers all over the world. So they've carved out the world to put their military in and to just continue to learn to extract money and accumulate wealth. So Southcom and Northcom are two of the military commands that are heavily occupying Puerto Rico, and they have a really great resource in that. Did I just speak for
Any other questions or comments?
Thoughts?
Hey, how are you guys? Excellent job with the presentation. I truly appreciate it. I just wanted to know, is there any way we can access the presentation? I'm an 11th grade teacher. I would absolutely love to incorporate these types of things into my classroom.
Yes, educator. I'm also in education. We are recording. We are recording, so we'll have the recording available, but we are free to also come in and give the presentation. So you can connect with one of us and we can talk about that.
Thank you so much.
Let me ask, and first of all, let me say that the part of the presentation I heard is excellent and absolutely necessary. Unfortunately, store duties pulled me over to the other side for a bit, so I look forward to going back to the video and looking at the entire presentation. But from an organizing standpoint, the sociological standpoint, one of the weird things and one of the weird divide and conquer ways that the oppressors have gotten to this country is this false division between Latina and Black American and African American, which is a stupid division, considering Black folk up and down the hemisphere, for one thing. More Black folk outside of the United States by many times than there are in it. But of course, it is also something that's sapping the organizing power. And you still have a lot of what I call Afro-Norte Americanos, a lot of Black Americans who still are succumbing to that particular mind game and divide, despite the number of public figures that are quite obviously, Afro-Latino, so forth, despite the history and so forth and so on. So from an organizing standpoint, as you all organize from the standpoints of your organizations and that type of thing, do you find that you still have to do a whole bunch of re-education on that? Is that still a stumbling block? Or do you find now that there's a lot more understanding of the overlapping relationship between who are cultural Latinas and racial demographics in the West? Is that still a stumbling block, or do you start to do a lot of education on that?
May I answer? I would say, well, it's a loaded question. I don't want to give you too much of a loaded answer, but every organizer has a different approach when it comes to subject matter like that. And the propaganda is working on some folks. And it comes from like a intentional, lack of like historical information that has always proven, like Latino, Black connections down to like Mexican and Black cowboys in Texas, to movements today where we're both here. Imperialism and is not racist, except when it comes to white people. It affects everyone in a different way, even working class people. As far as like, I don't think we would have to re-educate ourselves, but we do have to educate others who are probably exposed to so much propaganda. I mean, just think about the algorithms on TikTok. You really don't know what people are looking at. I mean, there is no like hive mind conception of like pop culture anymore. So you're always going to need someone who's exposed to different ideas. And one thing that keeps like BAP solidified in our position is that we continuously have to clear the air when it comes to like this type of propaganda spreading around. It's ahistorical, to say the least. And to create this divide is a way to keep us vulnerable and to keep our minds vulnerable, to limit our ability to critically think, to actually like find out this information ourselves in this age of anti-intellectualism. I think people, it's a willful ignorance that they would just rather, each race would rather blame, another race for something when there is a framework at play that should be paid attention to.
And I just would like to add that when you actually are organizing with people, there's so much solidarity that's happening. Like there's so many people that are working together that are against imperialism, that are against capitalism, that are holding the line really succinctly. So if you turn on social media where there's a lot of noise and you actually get in the field and talk to people, you'll realize that it's not that noisy. Like that's a very loud majority in my opinion. But when you talk to people and you really just say facts and you say things that are true and you talk to people earnestly and you actually connect with people, it's really not hard to disprove like the stuff that we see on social media or the propaganda that we did. Like Beyonce putting the Buffalo Soldier thing and saying that indigenous people and Mexican revolutionaries are enemies of peace. Like it's very easy to disprove that. It's very easy to point to the historical nature of what was happening of the Western expansion, which is settler colonialism. So I think if you were actually like talking to people, you're actually organizing with people, you're actually with people in the struggle, united, you don't see that noise as much. And if people are earnestly coming and they actually want to learn, they actually want to be better, you don't see that as much in my opinion.
Hey y'all, just echoing everyone else, thank you so much for this really insightful presentation. I'm Elise. I'm from the BAP Solidarity Network, and I have a question for my comrade Elio. So I know that on mainland, Puerto Rico can get like the news, particularly around like hurricanes and environmental, disasters. And I'm wondering if you could reflect maybe for us on how you understand those moments in relationship to the themes that we touched on tonight, from like environmental extraction, industrialization, demilitarization, colonization, and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. I think especially after Hurricane Maria, something that's definitely prevalent in our archipelago is disaster capitalism. So if you're not familiar with that, it's a hurricane, a fire, an earthquake destroys houses, infrastructure, displacing the population there, and folks are coming in and buying up the land. So there was a lot of, and there still are a lot of properties in Puerto Rico that are abandoned, and we're seeing a lot of the Bitcoin investors taking advantage of this law, where if you are an investor, you can basically move your business there and pay no capital gains tax on your business. But that doesn't apply to Puerto Ricans. And with all these folks coming in, the cost of living is just skyrocketed. And like it said in the presentation, about 45% of the population lives under the poverty line. And things like the Jones Act, where everything is imported, the cost of those goods is much higher because it's imported to the United States, and then they can mark up whatever price they wanted to, and then import that into Puerto Rico. So yeah, definitely things like hurricanes make a huge impact on Puerto Rico.
Hey y'all, thanks for the presentation. I definitely learned a lot. I think you really sort of captured well how corporate greed and capitalism sort of ravage these communities. I was wondering if you could speak, or if you have any thoughts, particularly on the industry itself, right, of sugar. I'm thinking about its addictive properties when consumed, too much, right? At least all sort of health effects, and we know that often Black and people of color tend to have those negative health effects in the communities at higher rate. And so I'm wondering if there's any kind of connection you can make with the history of Dominoes Sugar and these ill health effects on our communities.
I have some thoughts. I'm the almond mom in the making from what my brothers tell me. I'm always like looking at a nutrition fact. Growing up, I'm Jamaican, so I grew up eating sugar cane. And there's a stark difference between eating raw sugar cane and consuming refined sugar. And it's a difference in the way that you feel. Even in the food that I would consume, we use brown sugar instead of the refined white because it has a lower glycemic index allegedly. So when it comes to over-processed foods that usually include that refined sugar, those foods are in Black and Latino communities for us to consume because they're actually less expensive. If you go to Shoppers at Montgomery Mall, for example, you'll find that the snacks are actually cheaper than the produce. And that is by design because when I go to the Giant in Camden on 41st, it is the opposite. It's the opposite. And that's intentional, right? I think it's an individual responsibility, for people to, pay attention to their diet and know what is appropriate, for them genetically. Genetically, I would say, for example, I can't eat a lot of bread. And I think that just like comes from like my ancestry. I can't consume certain like beets, like when maybe my ancestors were used to sort them. So it's like things like that.
Also, I want to recommend this book that I'm reading right now called Grow Their Crops on the Ground. I actually got it here at Red Emerald's. But it speaks to not just the sugar industry, but also like corn, also dairy, all of these industries and all these big farms. Not your little like urban community garden, but these huge farms are making so much money, and they're in alignment with USDA. So even cheese, for example, a lot of Black and Latino people are lactose intolerant, but that the milk and cheese have both gotten pushed so deeply into our school lunch, it's gotten pushed into actually fast food corporations. And so the government and these corporations and these farms, they care much more about money than they do about health. And so what they'll do is create these studies that talk about the health benefits of these things. Yes, to justify why you need to intake more of it, why you need to buy more cheese or buy more dairy, drink more dairy, in ways that are not healthy, that are in the interest of capital, in ways that don't serve our communities or ourselves. And I think sugar is a similar way. These things are not serving us, they're not helping us, they are killing us, and there is a very clear way in which race and class has been used, or food has been used with race and class to keep marginalized communities marginalized and oppressed. And so yeah, some of what Zoe is saying, but yeah, all of it is intentional, and they're making, again, billions of dollars for us to have diabetes and heart condition and high blood pressure. And then we can't go to the doctor because we don't have insurance. And so it's just a cycle. We are continuously getting taken from, and they are continuously taking from us.
Yeah. Two more.
Oh, wait.
Yeah, hi everybody, my name's Jay. Thanks so much. I'm really interested in the colonization and internal colonization idea and how you think about that. So, Puerto Rican independence is a clear way to throw off a colonial oppressor. And I remember visiting Puerto Rican Cultural Center in Chicago, which had declared independence, and it was a great experience being there. I'm wondering how you see throwing off internal colonization in Baltimore. So what would that look like? How do you think about that, and how would that be done?
I think about it, one, with our campaigns, especially No Compromise, No Retreat. Could you go to that one? And this is, for example, a campaign that is rejecting that militarization and occupying force in a tangible way. So abolishing the 1033 program, which militarizes our police with Army-grade, military-grade weapons. It is stopping the training of Israeli forces, right? Stopping, Baltimore cops with Israeli forces. It's stopping the fact that there are cop cities that there's one going to be built in Coppin in Baltimore that is going to be $330 million. When, as I mentioned before, people can't even get food to eat. They don't even have grocery stores in their area. It's ending that economic warfare, right? It's shutting down these things that are actually tangible, that are actually material. And I think organization is what's happening, just how it happens in Puerto Rico, where people are going to organize and they are going to overthrow their oppressor. We will organize internally, and not just in Baltimore, but in our all of the internal colonies that are affected by oppression, affected by imperialism. They will organize, we will organize, and we will do the same thing.
So, also food sovereignty. Grow your own food as much as you can. Find a local farm, support them. Get up, go to that farmer's market. Support local farmers and your neighborhood farmers. In fact, this evening, if you guys would like, we brought plants, indigo, basil, some indoor plants to freshen like your home, the air in your home. I have some mint over there, and also seeds and dirt to start your own farm. Shout out to Plantation Farms Park Heights for the donations, by the way. They're a farm that is aligned with our principles to achieve food sovereignty and to also abolish the Jones Act.
And just, and just to remind you, we do have literature over there that can kind of speak directly to these campaigns. So this is not all that's in the Compromise No Retreat, but these are the things that we're kind of focusing on right now. And similarly with the Zone of Peace campaign, you can get more information about that, but that's a very tangible, material way you can kind of solve these things. Aside from getting organized, which is the most important one, like join an organization, be organized, because as you can see, the system is organized so deeply against us. Redlining was in 1910, that's when it started. This is 2025. So this system of organization is very powerful and very strong, but we can organize and we can overcome it because it's happened before.
Yeah, we can.
I just want to add to the question about the internal colonies. They're isolated from the other internal colonies. That's why our campaign for the Zone of Peace is to first let people know that we need to connect with the other internal colonies, address the needs, like we're not going to just jump to some NGOs and look for grants. Like we can solve these problems, and then connect us at least within the state, then within the Western Hemisphere. That is, the goal. So the internal colonies need to understand that they're isolated. They need to understand the conditions and how those conditions are imposed upon them, and then how do we organize against with specific particulars, and then understand how do we address like the more general thing of imperialism that what is imposed upon us. Last comment.
I guess I had a question, and it was on if you guys might have talked to like any of the workers with like Dominoes Sugar and kind of like the conditions there. I remember seeing in the news maybe like a few years ago that also they just had like their first black manager after like 100 years of being there, which might also speak to like the growth of the black men's leadership class. But I guess I was kind of wondering, just if you have any connections there, what that might be like.
So do I have personal connections with the people?
Just anybody, really.
No, I don't. This is This is just based on like the research that we've been conducting. So the articles that come out, the analyses that come out. I do not personally know anybody that works in Dominoes Sugar, and I would venture to say not a lot of people do. So not a lot of people actually know who is actually working here. I know what you're talking about with the first black manager recently, but I think it also speaks to the fact that there are maybe, I think 200 or 300 workers in Dominoes Sugar Company. Most of our workers actually are in the state, in the government here in Baltimore, but yeah. So I think I really have just been looking at the general conditions of the fact that, again, there are billions of dollars going to Dominoes Sugar, and the people who are working in Dominoes Sugar, one, we don't know who they are, two, we don't know where they're at, three, we don't know where they come from, and we're not seeing the benefits that are having this company here.
Yeah, and just to like dovetail, it's by design for us not to know, just because like the conditions that factories are under usually like inhumane or just like not healthy for humans to be like on their feet for 12 hours, and just like the average factory worker. The average factory worker shift is like 12 hours, 8 to 12 hours. I don't know if I want to get into this, but I think it's cautionary. Like, if we're examining Dominoes Sugar in this capacity, it's probably in our best interest if we don't know any workers. If you pick up what I'm putting down, just because of like the cautionary tale of, I think like a former comrade that passed on doing investigations actually at McCormick. He worked there and talked to the workers. He was part of like one of our member organizations, and it was reported on the news that he died from suicide at the job. And we know him. It just doesn't seem plausible. So, if you do want to know, if you're curious, just be
careful about who you talk to and make sure it's someone who is ready to spill the tea.
And really quickly, Dominoes Sugar Company is also privately owned, so it's very hard to get information. Just in general, it's really hard. A lot of it is under wraps. So even getting information on like the pollution, the suits that happened against Dominoes Sugar is very difficult. So it is really difficult to kind of get actual information.
Hi, I'm actually the last question. I'm Kai. Thank you everybody for signing in. If you haven't signed in, you want to sign in, come find Ash. My question has to do with the recent NATO announcement for everyone to ramp up militarization to 5% of GDP. We see that global militarization has local effects. Could you talk about what something like that, what the implications of something like that could be for a place like Baltimore or Puerto Rico, given that that's the sort of trajectory of the militarization globally?
Thank you for the question. As was talked about in the presentation, there's Southcom, Northcom, a lot of bases there. Puerto Rico is used as a jumping off point by the United States military to basically control all of Latin America, Cuba. There's a lot of military exercises done there from other foreign governments. So ramping up the military exercises and actions definitely has direct impact on Puerto Rico, because that is where that is one of the hubs in the Caribbean and Latin America. So there's definitely huge implications.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that really quickly, Baltimore, or not just Baltimore, DMV has so many military bases, so many training facilities. So in the same way that people are going to go to Puerto Rico, or people who go to Puerto Rico, they're going to come in this area, they're going to be more militarized. Baltimore has their clauses where the National Guard can get called on us for any time. So if you think about something like in 2015 when Freddie Gray was murdered and the National Guard was called, it's all connected. It's really a very militarized area. We are an hour from DC, hour and some change from the Virginia military bases. So similarly, we'll just be more militarized.
That was the last question.
Well, we have questions for you all. Do you see any parallels to the exploitation within other industries outside of agribusiness? We did have some soft mentions of it before, but is there anything that you could think of?
I am somebody who very much enjoys fashion and sustainable fashion and learning about the fast fashion industries, including not just the conditions of sweatshop workers, but how everything we overconsume in that department ends up going back into rivers in Kenya and in Africa, period. And that constant exploitation of Africa, of Black people, of marginalized communities, Native Americans, to keep creating these industries, to keep maintaining them. It's across the board, it's awful, and it's just, it really is just constant everywhere.
Any other thoughts?
Oh, they burn 80% of the world's trash is burned in Ghana.
Yeah.
But fun fact, that's why Burna Boy has that name.
Got one right there.
Excuse me, first, what other countries are doing military exercises in Puerto Rico?
That's a question. Question about other countries with military exercises in Puerto Rico.
I know one of the last ones was Ukraine, I believe. I'm sure there are plenty more, but I believe some of the last ones was Ukraine.
Just in case anybody missed the question, it's on the
Tourism,
Actually, with tourism, Elliot, could you speak to tourism in Puerto Rico and how that's another form of colonization?
Yeah, absolutely. So For example, the other night I actually saw a commercial for Dulce, which is a beautiful, beautiful, very sacred rainforest in Puerto Rico, and they describe it as the rainforest in your backyard for the United States. And so tourism is always going to be shown as this thing that's going to help the people, the money's going to go to the people. But it really is a strain on Puerto Ricans. One, there is a serious issue with resources like electricity. The grid, the electrical grid, has recently been privatized by this company called Luma. And they don't maintain any of the electric grid. There's always power outages constantly. So one, that tourism aspect drains the resources that people are already struggling for, just to keep power on. And Airbnbs, and speaking of Airbnbs, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of Airbnbs now in Puerto Rico, which is of course buying up all the homes that were somewhat affordable now, but of course it's driving the cost of living exponentially. And then just another specific example is there is an island called Vieques. Vieques was a former testing ground and development facility for the United States Navy, and the cancer rates in Vieques are extremely high. About a third of the residents in Vieques have cancer. But there is no hospital currently in Vieques. It's been closed down from the Fiscal Control Board, and there's ferry boats that take you to mainland Puerto Rico, and the cancer patients have to share those ferry boats with tourists also going to Vieques. So even just that way of just trying to get cancer treatment, it's not always a guarantee that you're gonna even make it to the mainland because there might be an influx of tourists. So there's a lot of way that tourism affects it.
I'm just going to add that it's not only in Puerto Rico, it's also like all of the Caribbean and all of these countries, Hawaii, that same type of like exploitation is happening, that same like robbing of land, where the people are suffering, is still everywhere.
Another parallel I see is with the tech sector. We see a lot of extraction of resources from the Congo to build iPhones. And I see that directly with the agricultural businesses, extraction from the land, the pollution that comes from it, and that, just some of that.
Also, the medical industry is a huge one. I think very recently, a Black woman's body, she had already passed, but she was carrying a child, and she was being kept alive. I think it was in either Texas or Georgia as a human incubator. Thank you so much. Thank you. In Georgia, and being used as a human incubator. And Black women historically have been very consistently used by white people, by people who sit in positions of power as scientific experiments, as a means of furthering human development, medicine, and things like that.
Thank you. It's true. Look up Tuskegee experiments. And also that trickles down to today. Just like how Black women in the 1920s and 1960s Mississippi were being sterilized, it's happening to Latin immigrant women and Puerto Ricans only. No, I do.
Yeah, like commenter was saying, birth control testing was done on women in Puerto Rico, but they didn't know, and a lot of women were sterilized without their knowledge. There's a really good documentary documentary about it called La Abolición. It's on YouTube, but it definitely talks about that.
Next question. Are you aware of any other countries whose population is facing similar conditions? So we heard the Congo in context of cobalt. I'm just going to throw in Madagascar in context of rose quartz and gemstones. Any countries you all can think of?
Okay, I think about the historical and continuing violence against the Canadian Indigenous population in order to mine oil and gas and place gas pipelines on their land. And of course, that's a historical problem, but it continues today. It continues to be part of the Canadian government's ongoing subjugation of their Indigenous population.
Hi everyone. The country I immediately think of is my own. Like, I'm Haitian American, and oftentimes people don't know that like our agriculture has been depleted by the Reagan administration, and then the Clinton administration. Hillary and Bill did a number on Haiti. If you fly into Haiti, you'll see the topsoil from our mountains are like around our coast because we don't have any trees, because the average Haitian uses trees as charcoal in order to like feed their family. So like, it's directly tied to imperialism in the United States, and oftentimes it's overlooked because it's like a black issue, but it's more than just a black issue, it's a community issue. So it's just like really disheartening for me to see my people suffering when I'm in America and we have so much access, there's so much access to electricity, to food, to like, even though we have food deserts in Baltimore, but like the average Haitian, they survive on less than $1 alone. And the Farmers Association of America also pushed the production of soybeans in Haiti. And like, soybeans aren't a native plant, right? So it's like destroying our native agriculture. Our rice is imported from China. Haitians have their own rice. We don't need rice imported from another country when we can export our own goods.
That's an internal calling.
Right here, this settler colony and the population within this settler colony are suffering. This is the problem. You know, right here, the feet on the ground, this thing that started, what they say, 16, 19, 15, 45, right here. This is where we are all suffering, and it's causing suffering outside of what we're calling the borders and in the ocean, and as the Monroe Doctrine that is still continuing, the backyard of the, whatever it's the United States. I just want to make it clear, like this settler colony and the people within the settler colony. Settler empire. And they think they can keep winning and oppress more people and continue empire. So I just want to put that in there.
Maybe a couple more comments.
I mean, this ties in, but is a more indirect, it's pretty direct actually. The progression of, the American urge to exploit people for being, lesser than, which is of course not the case, but slavery as indentured servitude to what it is today, because we're always looking for some kind of loophole to continue exploiting people, to prison labor. So getting as many people in jail as possible so we can continue working them for free so they can make, whatever it is that we would like them to be making. And I think that is worth bringing up here as well.
So similar to the cobalt mining, it's lithium mining in Chile, Bolivia, and Argentina, where it's unsafe working conditions, no wages, and then like the extraction of resources and then environmental damage. It's kind of just a similar thing.
in the Americas and the Amazon in Ecuador, Brazil, Bolivia, and parts for the expansion. And if I could sneak a question in, it was really striking the percentage of Puerto Rico that was taken for the sugarcane. And it just seems like a huge portion. And hearing a lot of the examples, a lot of them are really tied to the earth and the environment and the relationship that people have to that environment, or the separating people from that. And I was wondering how you see like environmental restoration as part of the goals of this movement.
Yeah, that's a good question. As we talk about food sovereignty is going to be a huge part of that. Planting sugar as a monocrop ruined a lot of the farmland. Before it was like tobacco, coffee, some sugar cane. But yeah, with the planting of the sugar cane, making it a monocrop and ruining that farmland, it's definitely done a number on farmland. It's going to be, first it's going to be, getting rid of the Jones Act, not having to rely so much on the importation, having to rely on the importation of goods from the United States. But yeah, I think the start of food sovereignty is definitely going to be a big part of that.
Oh, to dovetail on like food sovereignty in Puerto Rico, the land was eventually restored despite the crops, like the sugar crops, like ruining their arable land. It's been redeveloped, so most of their land is arable. 85% of Puerto Rico's land is arable, but the reason why they can't participate like in the global economy is because of the Jones Act, like limiting who they have like partnerships with. So like lucrative economic partnerships as far as like resources that would actually grow in Puerto Rico, food that Puerto Ricans actually grow would be more lucrative than what our friend in the back said about soybeans being grown in Haiti when Haitians don't grow soybeans. Like if it's not, endemic to your cultural like diets, like that is imperialism on your plate. Like that's the process.
Part of the solidarity, I'm part of the organization for solidarity in the Philippines. And so this question was making me think a lot about how other people have said other countries who are facing similar conditions of imperialism. Because even in the Philippines, I was thinking about sugar corporations that have been able to come into the country because there is like a puppet president, and like every other president before him has allowed foreign monopoly corporations to come into the country to buy up land, take over resources, extract labor from the people, has allowed like wealthy landlord families to buy up land, and is oppressing peasant farmers who are working that land, who are growing that sugar. So that was just something that I was thinking about that struck me as being really similar. And I think for me, that really points to the importance of building unity, among all, oppressed and exploited peoples who are facing the problems of imperialism, whether it be in the colonies and the semi-colonies, or, its consequences, in this country too. Just the importance of building unity around the different struggles that people are waging against state violence, against imperialism, and building a united front that can really build people's power to be able to confront our enemies head on.
Yeah, and I can give you a name of one of your enemies in that fight. It's called called the Indo-Pacific Command. So just like how Southcom functions in Puerto Rico, the Indo-Pacific Command functions similarly in the Philippines. In context of labor, that's why actually right now, Baltimore City public schools have a contract with Philippines, where they do this every few years or so. It's so weird. They'll just get teachers from the Philippines, and then they work here for maybe 5 or 6 years, and then they just go back home and never see them again. I've had some coworkers in the elementary schools I've substituted at where they've been hired based on this process. And we actually had an event where a few years ago, a summer school that we had hosted with Malaya Movement. Get connected with this. Malaya Movement. They have their organization that's similar to ours that focuses on Filipino human rights and across the Southeast Asian Pacific. So yeah, the process is similar. Get to know the Indo-Pacific Command because I would say they function a lot more evil than Southcom. Yeah.
I think we'll take this last comment on this right here.
Well, speaking of the Indo-Pacific Command, you folks have named a lot of this, so I'm just going to try to add a couple things. I'm from Hawaii, which is also occupied by the United States. When I'm thinking of other countries whose populations are facing similar conditions, I think about Sudan, I think about Cuba, but I'm also thinking about other Pacific Island nations and communities. I'm thinking about Guam, the Marshall Islands, who have also had to deal with nuclear fallout, the risk of nuclear war. Hawaiians received a ballistic missile warning, a false ballistic missile warning a few years ago that was really traumatizing to people. Thinking about what you mentioned about environmental restoration, I know a lot of young Pacific Islander activists who try to participate in the climate justice space and will go to different COP meetings every year, but the U.S. is such an impediment to any sort of meaningful efforts for environmental restoration and justice, that it's important that we dismantle U.S. imperialism in order to actually see those things realized. I'm also thinking about, folks mentioned soybeans. Hawaii also has a sugar plantation history, and now has to deal with genetically modified crops. Organizations like Monsanto, who also have their land grabs there. And then I'm just thinking about Maui very specifically, who has been dealing with the aftermath of Lahaina burning down. And now this fight to resist these white holiday property owners who have raised rents by thousands and thousands of dollars. So many Hawaiians have left Lahaina specifically and are fighting to put caps on the really exploitative real estate industry. So I'll stop there, but lots of connections.
Oh, thank you.
Before we go, I just want to acknowledge that you all said so many different countries that are going through similar things, even if it's in a different way. Like with Cuba, if we end the blockade, Cubans will not suffer. The blockade is the thing that is harming Cubans because the government is not harming Cubans. The communist government in Cuba is doing amazing things. I just got back from Cuba. So the blockade is absolutely a horrific thing that is harming the people in Cuba right now. But all of you named so many different countries, Hawaii, Sudan, Congo, Haiti, and the way that the U.S. Destabilizes these countries, forces them to migrate here, where they're then forced to deal with a bunch of other things with migration here, especially now. So we actually have an event coming up on July 19th that talks about forced migration, so I hope to see you all there. We can kind of continue this conversation. There's also a reference to prison population. We have an event in August actually on that as well. You can get information right there. But yeah, we'd love to have this continue this conversation because it's been a really great dialogue. I've enjoyed listening to you all.
Absolutely fantastic. And absolutely necessary. Before we give up an additional final last round of applause, a couple of things I want you to know. Hot stove, as I mentioned, is closed off, but you're certainly welcome to get anything from the cold case. You should take it all home, a dessert or a drink with you. Go and get that. You will see that I pulled out a few things that you will find pertinent to our conversation. Ed Morales has done a crucial work. La Isla de la Fantasía. This is obviously an Espanol edition. We will be restocked on an English edition, assuming Fantasy Island, colonialism, exploitation, and betrayal of Puerto Rico. So you definitely want to come and take a look at that, especially if you're reading Spanish. It's strong. Jose Velasquez, Carmen Rivera, and Andres Torres edited a volume called Revolution Around the Corner, Voices from the Puerto Rican Socialist Party in the United States. So again, looking at the U.S. to Island connection. And we just had a great talk recently with Jorel Melendez Badillo with the new history, Puerto Rico, national history, all right? So history that we're not getting in the schools has been touched upon, the real story on that. So come and get these from them because they dovetail, of course, with tonight's conversation. In a few minutes after you come and get these from me, I'm going to reopen the bookstore so that you can spend some time getting into there, not only the Latin American section, the war and imperialism section, the economic section, all these things that intersect with our conversation this evening, but plenty of other things as well. As I mentioned, do make sure that you take a look at the events page. So many good things coming up. Kevin Sherrod on Tuesday at 7 p.m. And I will always remind you to be at the next Red Emma's Mother Earth Poetry Vibe. Red Emma's Mother Earth Poetry Vibe. We are going into our 14th year soon of our quarterly open mic of peace, justice, poetry. Always have a great 5-star feature. Poet is always a dynamic open mic, so I hope to see you there. First Saturday in August. We go again August 2nd at 6 p.m. Fam, this is necessary. This is crucial. I look forward to hearing continued response as you take the presentation to various